So you want to truly challenge your players and create memorable monsters and epic boss battles. You want to throw a single solo monster at your party and not have it get destroyed due to action economy. And you want your main villain to be truly threatening. These things for yourself with my take on action-oriented monsters. Let's roll it. Welcome to the Dungeon Coach. I'm the Dungeon Coach. I'm going to lower that DC in your game by increasing the threat level of your monsters. Encounters in Dungeons & Dragons work best whenever there's about the same amount of monsters as there are players. Because if you want to throw a single solo monster at your players, it's going to have a really hard time surviving, especially after it goes, the entire rest of the party gets to spend their turns wailing on the thing, as it just sits there. You can give your monsters layer actions and legendary actions, but still sometimes it's just not enough, and the battle doesn't feel epic. Action-oriented monsters are Matt Colville's solution to this problem, and it's probably my single favorite D&D video in all of YouTube. So a link to his video will be down in the description. But there is one thing he said that I'm here to fix. No offense.
This video is about building better solo monsters, and it's not a system where you pick some options and you get a finished monster. It requires us to be designers.
Now, don't get me wrong, I totally agree with what he says, and I'm here to actually give you a system to help new DMs have it be an easier process to be able to come up with these things and spark some creativity for those veteran DMs. In this video, we're gonna get right into what villain actions are, my system on how I use them alongside my monster manual playbook. And stick around to the end where I put it all into practice and homebrew some of my own action-oriented monsters that you can use both of in Icewind Dale. Time out. 60% of the people watching this channel are not subscribed. So what that means is if those 60% hit that little red button, we hit our 1-year goal of 10,000 subscribers. So if you do like what you see here, then hit that little red button and help us get these videos out there to help more people. Now let's mix some monsters. So the basic rundown of action-oriented monsters comes down to their legendary actions. And instead of a legendary action, it's called a villain action. Instead of just something simple it can do like an attack or moving, it's something absolutely game-changing that changes the game state of the battlefield. In Matt Colville's video, it takes it one step farther and assigns these villain actions to different rounds. Assigning these villain actions to a round gives you a narrative pacing and flow of this thing and makes it more climactic. So as with lots of my homebrews, I've taken this system and ran with it. So some things you need to understand before sharing my system with you guys is monsters do not follow the same rules as players. Monsters need extra abilities to be able to go toe-to-toe with your players and actually push them and challenge them. Why do you think they added layer actions and legendary actions in the first place? And another final disclaimer is I'm not going to go into any specifics on any raw numbers or stats for an armor class, how much damage they do, all their modifiers. No math, because that's not what this video is about. I already did an entire balance and counter video where I backwards calculate how much health and stuff all these monsters should have. So if you want to see that, links down in the description. And when creating these things, you don't want to put it in a box too much already before the combat happens, because you want to be able to make adjustments on the fly. And if you design this thing as more of a template, you can use it for literally any level, and before the session you use it, then go specific. So what do you need to be able to create an action-oriented monster? Well, the first thing has nothing to do with actions or mechanics at all. Whether you're homebrewing this thing from scratch or modifying it from the monster manual, you got to get into the headspace of this thing. What is this thing all about? What's it meant to do? What makes this monster different than any other monster they're fight? And what experience or theme could you put through this whole thing to make it feel different? So once you have a feel for the flavor of this monster, then you can move forward. First up is its armor class and health. And like I said, I'm not getting into specific numbers, but make sure this thing can survive. Be careful about adding too much armor class because then they're missing the thing all the time, and that's not fun. And you don't want it to be this large stack of health. I will say make sure it has enough health to get through at least 2 rounds. Quick and easy tip is to just use the maximum health values for the monster. And you can't forget about movement. Movement across the battlefield is part of what makes it feel dynamic with all the pieces shifting and moving around. Maybe give it a fly speed, burrow speed, or more movement. But we'll also be taking care of this with some reactions and bonus actions. And now for this thing's actions. And I'm not talking about villain actions yet. I'm just talking about what it can do normally on its turn. In general, this is your bread and butter stuff about how many attacks it gets or if it can do anything else with its full action. A bonus tip here is make sure your monster has some sort of ranged attack. Now my thoughts for bonus actions for these monsters is just to spice things up and give it a little extra things it can do to maybe buff its own action, buff itself, or something else. This is where I like to give myself a few options here as a DM to really play around with things. What do I want to use its bonus action on? And you could also have bonus actions do much larger things like call in reinforcements or something. Next up is reactions, and I caution you on this, make sure these aren't too complicated because you will forget them. The biggest thing I do for reactions is come up with a trigger of some kind for what causes this reaction. The easiest reaction actions to remember are things that are triggered based on stuff that you do, and then things that the players do, and then very specific situations, whether it's the environment or certain abilities that monsters or players use. Reactions don't have to always be just an opportunity attack. And now we have villain actions. For me personally, I handle these a little bit different than Matt Colville does, and I separate them entirely from layer actions and legendary actions. So in the big picture, here's what my epic monsters have. They have their action, which usually involves some sort of melee or ranged attack that they can do, a bonus action that lets them buff themselves or their attacks up or do other cool things, reactions based on triggers that other things do, and then you have your villain action, which is locked in and based to a round that you have, and then you have a separate pool of legendary actions that are usually much smaller things that you can do after players' turns, like normal legendary actions, and then there's the layer action that you can also do on top of any passive effects that this monster has. Now, I know that might sound like a lot, and I don't always do this every time I use this system, but I scale it up to what feels right for that monster. So back to those villain actions. I usually make sure I have at least 3 rounds of villain actions because that's about how long the fights tend to last, but I break them up into 3 separate categories, a little different than Matt Colville. In order to tell an awesome combat story with these villain actions, I think of my first round villain action as a setup, the second one as a twist or some sort of tactical advantage, and the third one as the big final move. When you're creating these monsters and encounters, think about what's going to happen each round. You want to have something that comes in and it sets the stage for the battle, then something they have to deal with in the middle, and then some big thing they have to survive to finish it off. A couple more things you can tweak with villain actions is I've also had this villain action happen at the very top of the round. But in general, villain actions are used just like legendary actions, and you can use them after any player goes. Again, I'm just thinking outside the box here.
To think outside the box to win.
See, he knows what I'm talking about, so don't feel too boxed in with what you can do with these villain actions. And if round 1 finishes up and things are looking bad and you want to use your final move, do it. Now for the last couple of things here in your DM Monster Playbook, you have legendary actions, and this is, I pretty much run rules as written, except I don't always lock it into 3 legendary actions for every creature. For many different monsters I run, I might just give them 1 legendary action because that's all it feels, and I want to give it some type of thing it does off its turn. I've even given a creature 5 legendary actions that I used against 6 players, so it really felt like a back and forth against them and the monster. Now for layer actions, these are things that have to do with the environment or the surroundings that happen on initiative count 20. But outside the box here again, I've had smaller legendary actions happen on initiative counts 20 and 10. Things falling on them that they have to avoid, something moving across the battlefield that they have to dodge, or reinforcements. And that also comes full circle to what I said earlier about having a bonus action being possible reinforcements, but you could use them here too. Or both. The last category for these I have are passive abilities. There's some sort of aura or passive effect that always happens. You can think of these like permanent reactions if you want, where there's some sort of trigger and every time that trigger happens, this thing happens. Don't worry, we'll add this to the monster in a minute. But if you guys like this stuff and want to see more, then you gotta let me know by hitting that like button and leaving a comment, let me know what you want to see. I also have a witchery guide to monsters coming out soon. So for my system on action-oriented monsters, I broke it up into 2 parts, villain actions and triggers. I also broke the villain actions up into 4 different sections about generic villain actions, ones that set up or involve movement, ones that are in tactical and involve some sort of twist, and then that ultimate. I wanted to put the generic section in there for inspiration for regular actions, bonus actions, and the regular legendary actions. All right, it's time to create our monster, and we're going to start off with 1 single solo monster of a Remorahz. And a reminder, we're going to keep it simple, keep it basic, and keep it generic so we can make moves on the fly. Now I'm picking this Remorahz for 2 reasons. 1, it has to do with Icewind Dale, and I just gave you guys a big PDF resource for Icewind Dale, and I want to take this as a monster level to kind of help you out too. And second, Matt Colville did his video, and he used an onkeg, which is very similar, burrowy type bug. So I want to purposely do something similar, but show you how different you can make it be. Because here's the outline that Matt Colville did, and you can already see you could easily reflavor this for a Remorahz. So before I get into the actions of this Remorahz, I got to get into the mind of this Remorahz. What are these creatures all about? These are basically giant frost bugs that have some sort of bite and swallow mechanic, and their bodies are an internal heat furnace to keep themselves warm because they don't actually like the cold at all, and the only way they're able to survive in the cold is their internal heat. And if you look at their base stat block, they're actually so hot and they emit so much heat that whenever you deal damage to them, you take fire damage. But here's my version. Let's think outside the box. For its action, I'm going to leave it the same. It only gets 1 bite attack, and I really like that for as far as action economy goes because we can play around with it here in a second. It makes a bite attack and it instantly grapples the target, and if it makes a bite attack on a target it already has grappled, then it swallows it. But right now it only gets 1 bite per turn, but we're about to change that. I also want to give it something here for a ranged attack. I see it being some sort of spit that I wouldn't see being acid as much as it would be some sort of burning saliva, which I guess burning saliva is kind of acid, but it's a internal fiery based Remorahz. I feel like it would burn instead of be acid damage. Or you could have it be spines that it shoots out, whatever you want to do. For its bonus action, I'm going with two options here. It can either do a fire-based pulse around itself of 10 feet as it emits a huge heat blast from itself, or it gets one additional bite attack. This gives you some dynamic playstyle when playing this thing to see if you want to bite something, and if you have a player in your mouth already, you could bite it again to see if you swallow it. Or if you're surrounded by players, hit him with an AoE. So for the reactions, I want to do something a little bit different and play around with some different triggers. Also thinking about what this Remorahz is all about. The trigger in this case would be when it takes cold damage, it hates the cold damage, and it releases a heat wave out from itself in 10 feet to warm itself back up. So if you hit it with cold damage, watch out. Its second reaction is going to be based on when it takes fire damage. It's immune to fire damage, so it can't take any, but any fire damage that's dealt to it, it heals for half. And now for the villain actions. This first one for the setup is going to be a surface burrow trench. Probably could have a better name for that. All I would need to know for this villain action is it quickly moves around the surface, slamming into anyone, causing a strength saving throw to any characters in its way, and it leaves difficult terrain in its wake. A huge surge of movement from this creature as it starts the fight. Now you might have some questions about how much movement does it move, or what's the strength saving throw? I don't know. You don't want to put it in a box too much already before the combat happens because you want to be able to make adjustments on the fly. Round number 2 villain action is going to be something that changes it up and ratchets up the tension for something they really have to deal with. So this is going to be a multi-attack at one person to swallow them. And to try and make sure that this really happens, I'm going to give both of those attacks advantage to really try and make sure this thing swallows a character. And its third final move is a fire nova that erupts off of its body. And if you want to add some cool flavor, maybe after this thing goes off, now it's vulnerable to cold damage. For the legendary actions now, I'm going to throw out some small ideas that you can do as little small things after players' turns. Here's another great spot where you could give it another bite attack for another chance to either bite, grapple, or swallow another character. You can have it do another bonus action to that fire AoE pulse, or do a ranged spit attack. Legendary actions can really be used to tie the entire thing together. For the layer action, it could be a dexterity saving throw for sections of the ice to collapse from all the heat emanating from this Remorahz is calling the entire cave to melt. Or maybe as this creature moves around, wherever it's moved leaves unstable sections, and at the layer action, certain sections could collapse. And for the passives of this creature, it already has one. Every time you deal melee damage to it, you take 10 damage back. But maybe if you want to go easy on it, maybe you lower it down to 5 because there's so much other stuff going on. Or if you want to go crazy, maybe take one of its reactions and make it a permanent passive thing to where anytime it takes any cold damage, it emits fire. Time out. On my Patreon, I have different reward tiers to give you even more stuff. And now that includes more Patreon-only PDFs. I have a brand new video I just made explaining what all the tiers get you that I'll link down in the description. Back to it. All right, now I'm thinking outside the box here, but what if we used a villain action for a group of villain monsters? I'm going to use another monster from Icewind Dale of a Kobold vampire spawn. These things are only CR3, so I'm going to do a little bit of tweaks to each one of these things to show you how you can shake it up even for the small creatures. First, to get into the headspace of this vampire Kobold is a packed swarm of these little things that move around and latch on their little jaws to you. So the feel I'm going for is quick movement around vampire style and that latch. For the action, I'm going to leave it pretty much the same, except I'm going to add that grapple type latch effect onto the end of it. But instead of like the Remorahz being able to swallow the creature, this is just a little kobold. If you are currently biting a target and grappled, you can have them make a constitution saving throw to gain this vampirism. I think this would be really scary for the players if they knew about this mechanic, to where if it latched onto you for a longer period of time and it could sink its teeth even further, you could contract the disease. So now anytime a player has this thing on its neck, it would have to try and shake it off and spend so much effort to get this thing off. And now for their bonus action, in the spirit of vampires being able to shapeshift into this misty form, I'm also giving this ability to these kobolds. As a bonus action, they can basically misty step. I would give them 20 or 30 feet of movement that they could use as a bonus action in their mist form, not taking any opportunity attacks. Coach, that's crazy. They can just move all over the battlefield. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm going for. Because right now I have no idea how many of these things there are based on the players and based on the situation. But if there's 3 or more of these things, they're all swirling around the battlefield. For the reaction, I'm going to double down on this mist form thing. And if they're ever the target of an opportunity attack, they can turn into mist. I'm limiting this to just opportunity attacks because whenever I run these things, I want to run them all across the battlefield. So I'll probably be triggering a lot of opportunity attacks. And with all this movement, maybe you can give them another reaction where if a target attempts to leave your melee range, you as in the vampire kobold, you can move at least 10 feet to follow after it. And now for the villain actions, keep in mind, we're outside the box here. I'm trying to shake things up. These villain actions are going to be used for the the entire group. In this case, there's not just one single epic monster leading the charge. The round 1 setup action is going to be a mass Misty Step where they all turn into cloud forms and move each to one player. Dynamic setup of movement to where now each player has a vampire spawn to deal with. The round 2 tactical twist is a mass Misty Step onto one creature. Do they swarm around the lowest health person or the one farthest away? Now let me say this here, make sure you're on the same page as your players and you're not doing stuff where they feel like it's unfair, but also keep in mind players, these are villain actions. You don't have the same rules for monsters, like I said, that you do for players. Maybe on their normal turn, they can only Misty Step 20, 30 feet, but here they could do even more. Because the whole point of these villain actions is to get across this memorable moment of a scramble that they had to do to survive this encounter. And speaking of survival, the final finisher move here is that all remaining vampire spawn get one action to use right now. Meaning if they're next to a player, they can make an attack to latch on, or if they're already latched, they could do that Constitution saving throw to see if it gives them the disease. And now to finish up real quick with legendary actions, I would have a pool of legendary actions I could use in between players' turns, and I would pick one of the Kobold vampire spawn to make an attack. The layer action could be an environment where the fog starts rolling in and covering up parts of the battlefield. And they already have a passive of recovering health at the top of every round. And you're done. There's your action-oriented monsters villain actions. So now just like how I handled this with an entire group, I have a totally different way of handling this with spellcasters. It makes running spellcasters as a DM way easier because that's honestly something I really struggle with until I use this system. But if you want to see stuff like that, that's going to be a whole video, so you gotta let me know and hit the like button, because right now I'm trying a bunch of different stuff for you guys to see what you like and what you don't like. Because if I'm being honest with you guys, my videos haven't been getting a ton of likes, and I'm going to be going back to my homebrew house rule stuff because you seem to like those the most. So next week I'm going back to my roots with a homebrew house rules video to be my final push for that 10K subscriber mark. Guys, we only have 1 week left to finish it off here, and I really don't know if it's going to happen. The milestone of 10,000 subscribers in 1 year has never been done on YouTube for a Dungeons & Dragons channel. Trust me, I've done my research and it's never been done before. So thank you all so much for joining me here on this journey, and I want to give a special bonus shout out to my Ancient Dragon patrons. I really want to recognize you guys more for all the big things you do. Philip Bush, Jacob L, Sinjum, Finroar, and Jeremy O. And I almost forgot, another thing I'm doing for all my patrons is anyone who joins my Patreon between now and the end of this month is going to get access to my first ever monthly homebrew PDF. That video I talked about earlier about all my different Patreon tiers will be linked down below, so check it out if you want to see. Click right here if you want to see my Icewind Dale PDF with over 50 different homebrews, and click right here if you want to see something that YouTube recommends. So until next time, stay creative and think outside that box. Peace.